Trisha looked at the note for what felt like the 10th time. The handwriting was legible, but the content was crushing. Trisha, I'm sorry, but I can't go on like this. I've fallen in love with another woman, and today she and I are leaving for another city. Don't look for us. Tell the kids I love them. Hector. The woman slowly sank back into her chair, fingering the note as though that small scrap of paper could offer any comfort. It just can't be, Trisha muttered quietly. She had noticed something strange about Hector lately, but didn't want to believe it. It's true that a wife is the last person who finds out about her husband's infidelity. He used to tell her that he worked hard, that he was tired. He'd stay out late and be gone all weekend. Even the children seemed to suspect something, especially their eldest, Zach, who was now 14. Trisha knew that at his age he could understand that his parents didn't love each other and were together only because of necessity. Yet in front of the children, the woman maintained the play about a happy family. Daddy just works hard, she'd answer their questions, smiling to make it believable. He does it for us. She noticed Zach's sceptical frown, but he didn't question her further, likely to spare his younger siblings. Or perhaps he believed the adults would resolve it themselves. Trisha had long been tortured by suspicions, and she did her best to ignore them. She found long blonde hairs on her husband's car seat, even though her own hair was dark walnut-coloured and had been cut short. Just giving a ride to one of his co-workers, Trisha explained her suspicious finding. She also rationalised the smell of another woman's perfume on his clothes, the late-night messages, and the evasive looks from his friends. Why, she thought, clutching the note in her hands, why did I justify him when everything was so obvious? But the reason was easy. She was used to trusting him, or perhaps, and she had never lied to Hector, even about minor matters, throughout their 15-year marriage. Or maybe she was just terrified of shattering their stable world that she had grown so accustomed to over the years. Don't trouble trouble until trouble troubles you, Trisha's grandmother used to say. Trisha did just that, pretending everything was as it used to be, until Hector took the first step. Mum, what are we having for dinner tonight? Zach asked, peering into the kitchen. He had a knack for sensing her mood, and immediately realised something was off. Trisha flinched, attempting to hide the note, but her son snatched it from her hands after reading it for a few seconds. He sighed maturely, not surprised, as though he had long been prepared for such a situation. I see. Have you called him yet? Why? What do you mean, why? The eldest son responded, sitting next to her. Among all the children, he resembled Trisha the most, with dark hazel hair, expressive green eyes, and a straight, neat nose. But unlike the gentle Trisha, Zach was serious and wise beyond his years, as if he was preparing to take on the role of family head. You'll have to discuss divorce, alimony, and who's going to pay for the flat. We still have a mortgage for 5 more years. You're probably right. I should talk to him about it. It's just that I don't believe it's real yet. Her son sighed, covering her hand with his. I understand, Mum. This is very difficult for you right now. But we both knew this was going to happen at some point. How long has he been cheating on you? 3 years? 5 years? Trisha recoiled. I don't know, and let's not discuss that. You'd better call your younger sister and brother to dinner. Zach stood up. Okay, you're not going to tell them yet, right? No, I'll contact your father first. Trisha crumpled the note and tossed it in the trash. However, despite her attempts, Hector didn't answer any calls or texts. At his work, Trisha was told that he had resigned a few days ago. Trisha also called some of his friends, and they didn't know anything either. The woman gazed thoughtfully out the window. The children were asleep, giving her time to deliberate on her next steps. After Alicia, their youngest daughter, was born 7 years ago, it became apparent that Trisha would not be able to go to work for a long time. "What's the point?" her husband had asked. "Even if you work double shifts at the hospital, your salary won't cover expenses for babysitting, cleaning, cooking. Someone has to take care of the children and the house while you are at work." Trisha sighed, acknowledging that nurses were not so well paid. "Why don't you focus on the house and the children? I'm sure we'll manage financially." So she heeded her husband's advice and resigned from the hospital where she had worked for many years. There was a shortage of nurses, and her responsible, careful nature was greatly valued, making her departure a significant loss. She hadn't wanted to quit. She enjoyed her work, but juggling it with caring for her husband and children was challenging. After leaving her job, Trisha initially felt lost. Now, her mornings were spent taking Alicia and Brandon to kindergarten and Zach to school. She would then go to the grocery shop, wash dishes, tidy up toys, do laundry, sweep and mop the floors. By the time lunch was ready, it was time to fetch the younger ones from kindergarten. Picking up Zach from school used to be part of her routine, but once Brandon started attending kindergarten, Zach protested. "I'm an adult now," he told his mother. "I can walk to school by myself." "You're only 9, Trisha objected. Zach just furrowed his eyebrows stubbornly. "The school is near the house. You already have 2 children to pick up from kindergarten, and then there's me. I'm embarrassed to walk with my mum, like a little kid, honestly." His mother sighed and agreed. Once Zach decided he was unyielding. Over time, Trisha assimilated into this home life routine and could hardly remember her working days. Their income from Hector was sufficient, and he was content to return to a clean house, a hot dinner, and well-cared-for children after work. And his wife no longer smelled of iodine and other medicine. However, now Trisha was at a loss about what to do. She hadn't worked for 7 years. They still had a few more years to pay off the mortgage for their apartment. The money she had could last for a month or 2 if they cut all expenses. She hoped Hector would come to his senses and call, but she had a gut feeling that wouldn't happen. What should she do then? Where should she get money? Trisha had no one to help her. She didn't know her father, and her mother had passed away 5 years ago. "I need to find a job," Trisha thought, "or we'll end up on the street." The woman sitting across from Trisha glanced at her resume again and sighed heavily. She pushed her heavy metal-rimmed glasses down to the tip of her nose. It was nearly the end of the workday, and the employment officer wanted to get it over with and go home as soon as possible. But now she had to deal with this situation. A 30-year-old woman, the mother of 3, who hadn't worked for 7 years, having last been a nurse in a hospital. "I don't know what to suggest to you," she said. "I assume a daily duty or even full-time work wouldn't suit you." Trisha sighed and gestured dismissively. The woman snorted in displeasure. "Then I have nothing to offer you." "Nothing at all?" Trisha asked for clarification. "Yes," she said briefly, but seeing the look of desperation on Trisha's face, the woman tried to reassure. "I still have your phone number. If anything comes up, I'll call you." "Thank you," Trisha said, smiling before she walked out and carefully closed the door behind her. Once outside, she got into her old black Toyota, a car she had purchased before her marriage. Leaning back in the driver's seat, Trisha exhaled slowly. "It's okay," she muttered to herself. "I'll overcome everything." She mentally counted her remaining money. It was enough to last another month. She had already minimized her expenses, but didn't want to compromise on her children's needs. However, if she couldn't secure a job, she'd have to cut back on her activities. She considered selling her belongings. Her clothes and shoes weren't particularly valuable, but she could pawn her jewelry, laptop, and perhaps the TV in her bedroom. But what's next? Would she have to take the full-time job? What about the kids? Leave them alone from morning till night? Of course, Zach is 14, Brandon is 10 and Alicia is 7. They are not babies, and Zach has been saying that he can cope with the younger ones. Feed them, take them out of school, make them do their homework. Only, do I have the right to put the responsibilities of adulthood on his shoulders so early? But 2 weeks later, Trisha had a sudden phone call. "Hello?" she said carefully into the receiver, a sense of dread creeping over her as she anticipated an offer for some credit or a tale of a suspicious transaction on her card. Unexpectedly, the pleasant female voice on the other end surprised her. "Hello, my name is Mary Austin. Your number was given to me by the Employment Service. Are you still looking for a job?" "Yes," Trisha replied hastily, embarrassed by her own impulsiveness. "Good." The woman seemed genuinely pleased. "It says here you have many years of experience as a nurse, and you have worked with critically ill patients?" "That's correct," Trisha confirmed. "I'd like to ask, would you consider a position as a caregiver?" Trisha hesitated for a moment. She had never worked as a caregiver, but she reasoned it couldn't be much harder than nursing. If she could manage an entire ward, she could certainly handle one seriously ill person. "I would need to know all the conditions first," she answered cautiously. "Of course, I'll tell you everything," Mary Austin promised. "Would it be convenient for you to come to my office tomorrow morning at 10 o'clock? "Yes, of course." "Great. I'll text you the address. See you tomorrow. I'll be waiting for you." "Goodbye," Trisha replied, ending the call. Her heart pounded inexplicably. It was too early to celebrate, but the spark of hope had been reignited. After dropping the kids off at school, she drove to the appointment. Along the way, she replayed potential answers to any questions she might be asked and noted down her own queries on her phone. The office was in the city centre, inside a huge modern business centre. As Trisha stepped into the immaculate, almost silent elevator, she surmised that Mary Austin must work for some very affluent people. "Good afternoon, who are you?" A young, pretty girl, likely a secretary, greeted her in the reception area. "I have an appointment here for an interview at 10 in the morning," Trisha informed her, "for the position of caregiver." "Oh," the girl replied, surprised, yet sympathetic. But she quickly regained her composure and smiled politely. "Please sit down. I'll check everything." Trisha sat down and the secretary called on the phone and asked something quietly and quickly into the receiver. The answer was apparently positive. She then stood up, smiled at Trisha again and said, "Miss Austin is expecting you. Please come in." Trisha was escorted like royalty. She was slightly unsettled, doubting a mere nurse could receive such treatment. She even wondered if there had been a mix-up. "Hello," Trisha said briefly as she entered the office. Mary Austin was an attractive woman around Trisha's age. She had black hair tied neatly in a low ponytail, an expensive pair of glasses, and was clad in a business suit. "Good afternoon. Please have a seat." She gestured to a soft chair opposite hers. "Our records show you have extensive experience as a nurse, including care for critically ill patients. You're also interested in a caregiver position?" the woman asked. "That's correct." "Good. I represent the interests of a client who needs such a caregiver. He has been paralysed below the waist for several years and suffers from several cardiovascular, respiratory and digestive diseases," Mary explained. Trisha nodded, showing she was attentively listening. "Physically, your work won't be strenuous. The entire house is adapted for my client's needs. It has a motorised wheelchair, elevators, handrails, etc. Medical tasks will be simple. Injections, pills, drips, and so on. Nothing you wouldn't know how to do as a nurse." "I see," Trisha said. Mary paused, as if choosing her words carefully for her next question. Then she asked, "I guess you have children?" Trisha swallowed. From that moment, the woman at the employment centre began to look at her in such a way that it became clear that she would never get a job. But there was no point in lying. "I have 3, Trisha replied. Mary nodded thoughtfully. "They're all in school? And they'll be on vacation soon, right?" "Yes, in a couple of weeks." "Are you considering a residential option? My client's house is out of town. It would be inconvenient for you to commute daily." Trisha shook her head. "I don't have anyone to leave my children with," she said sadly, expecting to be dismissed. But Mary said, "You don't have to leave them. You and your children will live together on the estate, in the outbuilding. It's a separate, cosy building. I assure you, you'll like it." Trisha looked at her incredulously. "Are you saying that we can live in the tenant's house for free?" Mary nodded and smiled. "Additionally, you won't have to cook. The meals are free, as is the lodging. You'll eat with the rest of the staff." "That sounds tempting," Trisha said cautiously, suspecting a catch. "Exactly," Mary confirmed cheerfully. "Would you like to know the work hours and wages?" "I would," Trisha replied cautiously, and Mary swiped across her tablet screen and turned it toward Trisha, whose eyes widened. "This is the weekly pay," she explained. In a week? Trisha was even more surprised. So much. "Yes," Mary sighed a little too humanly, distracting from her flawless business image. "I understand you're expecting a catch, and there is one." Trisha pressed her lips together, slowly nodded, and looked questioningly at Mary, who removed her glasses and tiredly rubbed the bridge of her nose. "My client is a unique individual with a challenging character. Not everyone can get along with him," Mary said finally. Trisha exhaled in relief. "That's it? I've encountered all sorts of people in my years at the hospital. We didn't receive additional pay for dealing with difficult personalities." "It's not quite that simple. I can't guarantee a stable work schedule. Essentially, if my client decides he needs you at 2 a.m., you will have to wake up and be there." "But everything you'd mentioned before is accurate?" "Yes. The salary, as I previously mentioned, is paid weekly due to high staff turnover. You and your children will live in a separate building and have meals provided. If you or the children need transportation, a car with a driver will be available. So, in return, I must care for an irritable elderly millionaire and be ready to serve at any moment." "You could say that." "I'm ready," replied Trisha. "When can we start?" After some time spent on paperwork and waiting for the children's holiday to start, they finally packed up and headed to Mr. Arnold's estate. "Mum, is he some sort of madman?" Brendan asked. "We're going to an isolated place." Trisha flushed, aware that the driver Frank was listening. He had been sent by her new employer. "Brandon," Trisha scolded, "we're not just going anywhere. It's a closed settlement. Mr. Arnold is an ordinary person. Please mind your words when you meet him. This job is crucial to me." "Mr. Arnold will likely only meet you," Frank interjected. "He isn't fond of new people. Also, he instructed me to take you directly to the outbuilding." "I see," responded Trisha. Shortly afterward, they arrived at the settlement. "Wow," Brandon explained. "If there are people living here, they must be very wealthy." "Brandon," Zach chuckled, while Alicia almost hit her forehead against the glass, straining to see everything. Once they drove through the entire settlement, they reached a large area enclosed by an elegant yet tall wrought iron fence. The driver pressed a button on a small black remote and the gate swung open. "We are now entering the estate grounds," Frank commented. They drove for a while along a road lined with neatly trimmed trees. A massive modern house made of glass and metal loomed ahead. However, the car veered left and didn't head towards the mansion. A few minutes later they pulled up to a small, tiny wooden house. Upon entering inside, Trisha noticed that despite its compact exterior, the house was surprisingly spacious inside. The small entryway led directly into a living room that also served as a kitchen and dining room. A large ensuite bathroom was available, and, most importantly, there were 4 bedrooms. "Wow!" Brandon squealed. "Am I getting my own bedroom?" Trisha smiled. "It appears so." In their apartment, the brothers shared a room, while only Alicia had her own. Zack gazed at his mother and smiled. "He's all grown up now," thought Trisha suddenly. "He needed a separate room a long time ago." Meanwhile, Frank had already brought in all their things and said, "Settle down, rest. They'll probably call you for dinner in about an hour. That's when you'll meet everyone." "Thank you, Frank," said Trisha sincerely. He smiled. "It was a pleasure to meet you all. I hope you enjoy it here and decide to stay." In the hour they had, everyone managed to unpack their things and start getting used to their new surroundings. "Mummy, I really like it here," exclaimed Alicia, running up to Trisha and hugging her legs. Trisha smiled and stroked her daughter's hair. "I'm very glad," she said. "I hope you won't get bored here while I work." Just then there was a knock at the door, and a tall, fair-haired, brown-eyed man entered the cottage. He was dressed simply in a white t-shirt and black jeans, but his confident demeanour suggested that he played a significant role there. "Good afternoon, everyone," he greeted first. "My name is Nick. I'm Mr. Arnold's assistant and the manager of this house." "Pleased to meet you," she replied. "My name is Trisha, and these are my children, Zack, Brandon and Alicia." "How do you do?" greeted the children in unison. Nick smiled. "I'm very glad. I'm sure you'll liven up our sleepy kingdom. Now, let's all go have lunch." He led them down a path that led to the side entrance of the mansion. Through this door they entered a large, cosy kitchen. "Here are our newcomers," greeted a cheerful woman's voice. Trisha saw a slightly overweight woman in her 50s. "I'm Sarah," she said. "I'm in charge of food in this house. Please join us at the table." Trisha introduced herself and the children, and they took their seats at the table. There were about 10 other people there, all employees of the manor. They introduced themselves to Trisha, but she was so nervous that she merely smiled and nodded in response. Nick sat to Trisha's right. "Don't worry," he whispered in her ear. "You'll remember everyone in a couple of days." "How do you know what I was thinking?" Trisha asked. "It's not difficult. When I got a job here myself and everyone was introduced to me, I thought the same thing." Trisha grinned. Her initial fear had subsided. Everyone seemed very nice and friendly, and the kids were well behaved. After lunch, Nick took Trisha to meet the boss, while Frank volunteered to give the children a tour of the estate. When Nick and Trisha stopped in front of the office door, her employer's assistant looked her gently in the eyes and said, "Trisha, remember any comments that Mr. Arnold makes are not personal. He is just an elderly man with a difficult past and a bad temper. That's why we're offering you a good salary and luxury conditions." "Thank you for saying that, Nick, but don't worry, I'm tougher than I look." "I'm sure you are." Nick smiled, and then he knocked and opened the door. "At last," came a creaky old voice. "I thought I was going to die in here before any of you decided to come in. I wonder why I pay you all such a high salary." In a chair by the window sat an old, hunched man. Trisha immediately thought he was the type of character depicted in books as an evil old relative to a poor orphan. It was clear that Mr. Arnold was once a tall and robust man, but age had made him frail, drawing him closer to the ground. His shoulders remained broad, even a little proudly so. With his short grey hair, stubble, long straight nose, tightly closed lips, and eyes that were angry and prickly, he looked at Trisha coldly. His eyes, once probably blue or green, were now so faded it was hard to tell. With those eyes, he studied Trisha as if scanning her, checking what was inside her. "Who is it?" he asked Nick, ignoring Trisha as if she weren't capable of answering. "This is Trisha," Nick replied. "She'll be your new nurse." "Hello, nice to meet you, Mr. Arnold," Trisha said, unwilling to stand around waiting to be addressed. The old man frowned unhappily, as if he had tasted something sour. "Yes," he said. "They get worse every time. Fine. Nick, we'll see how we can work with her later." The assistant gave Trisha one last smile and left. Without Nick, Trisha instantly felt vulnerable, but she was unwavering in her decision to not let her mentee ruin her mood. She needed this job. She liked the cozy house where they were located, and she appreciated not having to go anywhere. And she certainly had no plans to leave within a week. So, Trisha composed herself, smiled, and said, "Well, where should we start? Maybe I should shave you first. You look more like a homeless man than a millionaire." Why did I say that? She thought in horror. I wanted to discuss my skills, how I'm a highly qualified nurse. Now he's going to fire me for sure. Mr. Arnold raised his thick eyebrows and unexpectedly burst into laughter. "Like a homeless man," he exclaimed. "Well, if that's the case, lead me to the bathroom." "Where's your bathroom?" she asked. The old man rolled his eyes. "Now, that's professionalism at its best." He pressed a button on the arm of his chair and started moving. Trisha had no choice but to follow him. Mr. Arnold led her to a large, spacious room. Trisha had a few seconds to take in her surroundings and was amazed at how conveniently everything was arranged. She found a cape, shaving foam, and a shaving machine. "Do you even know how to use these?" Mr. Arnold asked doubtfully. "I do," Trisha replied calmly. The last time she used it was a while back, when she was still working at the hospital. One of the patients asked her to shave him before neck surgery because he couldn't do it himself. His hands were shaking. "I'll manage," Trisha thought. After finishing her work, she looked at the result with satisfaction. "There," she said, turning her ward towards the mirror. "An entirely different look." Mr. Arnold saw himself and was aghast. "What have you done, you fool?" he shouted. "Couldn't you at least leave a few millimeters? Why did you cut everything to 0? Now all my wrinkles and folds are visible. I look like I'm about to die." Trisha swallowed but decided not to show fear. "It's unhygienic," she said sternly, "and it looks better on you. Trust me as a woman." The old man chuckled. "Have you ever had a man, woman? You look like an old maid." Trisha flared up. She had arrived here in a simple dress without makeup and her hair in a ponytail. "Don't worry," she said dryly. "I have 3 children." Mr. Arnold whistled. "And with different men?" he said snidely. "From one." "Well, he's an interesting type. He has 3 children and sent his woman to work." Trisha pressed her lips together. "We broke up." "Why? Did you piss him off, so he ran away?" "That's none of your business," Trisha answered, sharper than she intended. "What's next on the plan?" "Take the tablet from the table," the old man grumbled. "There should be left a detailed schedule." Trisha found the tablet at the indicated place. She looked over it. Indeed, there was a lot to do. It seemed that Mr. Arnold was seriously ill, judging by the number of pills and injections he required daily. "Have you had lunch yet?" the woman asked. "No, I was waiting for you." "Of course I've had lunch." "I see." Trisha decided not to respond to his rudeness. "Then you can take a rest and Then you take a rest and I'll make an IV now." "You're a genius, I see." She clenched the tablet, her fingers turning white. but said nothing.
"Should we start the drip with you lying down?" Trisha, gathering her courage, once asked Nick if their boss had a wife and children.
"As far as I know," he replied, "no children. But he had 4 wives."
4?
Trisha gasped. "Yes, he married his first wife when he was quite young. I think she was from a wealthy family, and he was either working for her father or they were in business together, I'm not sure. It was a marriage of convenience, and in the end they divorced. Then he married a model who was 10 or 15 years younger. They were together for 3 or 4 years, but he caught her cheating and divorced her as well. The third wife left him. She was a young and pretty girl, and she quickly got bored with him."
"Wow," Trisha sighed. "And the 4th?
"The 4th was an old friend of his. They were the same age and had known each other for a long time. They married when they were both over 50. They seemed to have a good life together, but she died about 5 years ago of cancer."
"That's sad," Trisha commented.
"Yes, those who have been working here longer than me say that's when he changed. He was supposedly quite bearable before. Not an angel, of course, but one could live with him. Now he's becoming more difficult each day."
"That's sorrowful. Does he have any relatives?"
Nick shrugged. "He has a sister who has her own children and grandchildren, but they live abroad and rarely visit."
"He's a very lonely man," said Trisha.
"It's sad to be so sick and to live alone in a huge house." "True," replied Nick. "He takes his frustrations out on those around him."
Every evening, Trisha looked forward to the end of the workday, when she could finally spend time with her children. They had settled in quite well. All the staff on the estate were friendly towards Zach, Brandon, and especially little Alicia. Sarah treated them with treats. Frank would take them for rides, with Trisha's permission, when he had errands for the boss. They loved exploring the estate with its massive garden and many beautiful quiet corners. They only made sure to avoid the master of the house, which was not difficult. Mr. Arnold only went for walks with Trisha, usually in the morning and occasionally in the afternoon or late evening. After 2 weeks, Trisha was reminded for the first time of her irregular working hours. She and the children had long been asleep when her phone suddenly rang. It was Nick.
"Trisha, rush to the house immediately. Mr. Arnold is having a seizure."
Instantly awake, Trisha remembered she had been warned that her patient could have such attacks. Without bothering to dress, she threw on a robe and rushed into the house. She quickly entered the bedroom. Mr. Arnold was half lying on the bed and breathing so hard that she heard his whistles and wheezes from afar. Next to him was Nick, who had already opened the windows and was gathering the medical supplies. Nodding in gratitude, she began to work. She placed an oxygen mask over Mr. Arnold's face and started the oxygen supply. She then found the necessary medication and administered it. Thankfully, the attack wasn't severe, and the drugs took effect quickly. "How are you, Mr. Arnold?" she asked, once his pulse and breathing had stabilized. The old man wheezed.
"For the man who nearly died, I'm well."
"You need some hot tea," Trisha suggested. "I'll have it made right away."
"Good," he replied. "Also, I have one more favour to ask. Will you do it?"
Trisha nodded. "Yes, of course. What is it?"
"Hurry up next time, or you'll be too late."
Trisha felt her sympathy for the old man evaporate. "I'll try," she replied coolly. "I'll go and arrange for the tea." After she had asked for the tea to be made, Nick came into the kitchen.
"How are you?" he asked.
"Fine."
"That's just the way he is. He'll play the scumbag till the end, even when he's dead."
"Play?" Trisha asked. "That's the way he is in my mind." The manager sighed and ran his hand through his hair.
"You know," he said in a confidential tone, "I sometimes think the boss isn't really like that. He just decided at some point that this was the only way to communicate with the world, and he's now afraid to act human."
Trisha shrugged her shoulders. A noble version, Nick, but I'm sorry. I believe he's being sincere.
Nick smiled. Would you like some coffee? He suggested.
No, I'd rather go to bed. Good night.
Good night, Trisha.
The next day, when Trisha and the children came for breakfast, Nick made an unexpected announcement.
Trisha, you have the day off today.
Why is that? She wondered.
The manager shrugged. The chief said so. His sister's visiting him with the kids. I guess they'll look after him.
Trisha frowned. And the injections? The drip? Nick waved his hand.
Don't worry, we call a nurse from a private clinic.
And why doesn't she come every day? Why do you need me?
The boss doesn't like new people.
Sarah suddenly chimed in with a smile, who was serving cheesecakes to the children.
That's why he insists on having someone permanent, someone who knows all of his habits.
I see, Trisha replied. She added mentally, so he drives people crazy and makes them quit. A permanent slave is more pleasant to abuse than nurses from a private clinic who will be different every time. She didn't say it in front of the children because she wanted them to believe she had a good job.
We've almost all been given the day off,
Frank chimed in.
If you don't mind, Trisha, and you guys too, I can take the kids to the zoo, and we can stop for lunch somewhere on the way.
Hooray! Alicia cried joyfully. Of all three, she was the closest to the young, cheerful driver, who always paid attention to the children. No, my dears, Trisha said firmly. Frank has the day off and I can't impose on him. But the driver dismissed her concerns.
Don't worry, Trisha, he said. I'm going to the zoo with my nephew, who's 10. I can take your kids too. It's not a problem for me.
Trisha looked at the children with doubt. We'll behave, Brandon pleaded with his mother.
Zach shrugged his shoulders, saying, I'll go if I have to.
All right, she sighed. Then I'll go get the money.
You don't have to, Frank replied. The boss always leaves us money for small expenses.
Don't even worry about it, Sarah assured her. After breakfast, Frank and the children went to the garage to start the car. Only Nick and Trisha remained in the kitchen.
Do you have plans for the weekend?
Nick asked Trisha. I'm not sure. I guess I should go to the city and check on the apartment.
Nick perked up. Do you want to go together? I've got a couple of the boss's errands to run. It won't take long, and then we can check your apartment. We could have lunch on the way back, if you don't mind.
Yes, we can, Trisha replied. With Nick, she felt at ease and comfortable. He knew how to keep a conversation going without being intrusive. He spoke interestingly about his current affairs, without revealing too much. Trisha realized how much she had been missing simple human interaction. After she resigned from her job, her life revolved around her husband and children. She had friends from college and work, but they had their own lives, husbands, children, work, and couldn't meet too often. After Hector's leaving, she retreated into her troubles. Worrying about job prospects, mortgage payments, and her children's feelings consumed her. She had no time for herself. How long have you been working for Mr. Arnold? She asked Nick. Nick thought for a few seconds, then replied,
5 years.
That's a long time, she exclaimed.
Well, except for you, I'm probably the newest in the house.
Amazing. How do you all manage to stay? Has he always been like this?
Nick laughed. When I started, he was perhaps a little gentler, but he wasn't particularly kind. I can't deny that I've had my difficulties with him.
I can imagine, Trisha sighed.
For the first 6 months, I wanted to quit about 7 times a day. Eventually, it became less frequent. Now, I don't think about it at all, Nick confessed.
Trisha frowned. Why? Is it the salary?
It plays a part, yes, but it's not the only reason.
What else, then? Trisha was curious. Nick seemed so smart and confident. Unlike her, he could probably find many great jobs elsewhere.
Experience, Nick replied. I not only manage the house, but also help Mr. Arnold to conduct business remotely.
Although he looks so weak and decrepit, his brain is still sharp, and I'm doubtful I could find another job that would let me learn how to manage such large capital." "I see," said Trisha, "but your life seems to revolve around Mr. Arnold. Don't you find that a pity? I assume your wife and children hardly see you at home."
Nick laughed. "Of course I don't look very young," he said, "but I'm only 33.
Trisha was embarrassed. "I don't know what you mean," she admitted.
"And you look wonderful." "Thank you. I'm flattered. It's not every day I get compliments from such beautiful women. I meant I don't have a wife and children yet."
"Fiancé?"
"No."
"Girlfriend?"
"No. Does that look suspicious?"
Trisha laughed.
"A little," she admitted. "I'm just a workaholic. I want to start a family when I'm sure I can provide for them. By the way, we're here. Can you wait? It's just 15 minutes, then we'll drive to your apartment."
"Sure," Trisha replied. Nick grabbed some folder with documents and left. Trisha was left alone in the car. She thought that perhaps, like Nick, she might find herself tied to this house and the mean old man for years to come. It's summer now, but what about in the fall, when the kids go to school? She suddenly realized that Mary Austin, who had hired her, hadn't discussed this issue with her. Likely because she hadn't expected Trisha to stay for so long. But Trisha is holding on, and she's not going to quit.
"No, you, Mr. Arnold, won't get it."
She bit her lip painfully, remembering last night. She had been truly afraid for him then, and for the first time had felt sorry for him. But he, as soon as he could breathe, immediately insulted her. Nick came back and interrupted her sad thoughts. He looked pleased.
"Let's go to your place?"
"Let's go." It was unlikely, as if anything could happen there, but Trisha was still more used to being in control. "Now for lunch," said Nick cheerfully.
"I'll show you a wonderful place."
"I don't think they cook there as well as our Sarah does," laughed Trisha.
"Oh, yes," Nick sighed, "but I'll still try to surprise you."
He took her to a large French restaurant situated on the top floor of a high business centre. The pleasant music playing and the air conditioners operating at full blast were a welcome respite from the hot summer day. They were led to a table with 2 comfy sofas by the window, offering a view of the river and the bridge.
"Would you mind if I chose for you?" Nick asked.
"Go ahead,"
Trisha cheerfully responded. "I am not familiar with everything here anyway."
"Fine," Nick replied. When the waiter came up, Nick pointed his finger at several items on the menu without showing Trisha. So she didn't know what to expect, and was very surprised when the first thing they bought her was a glass of red wine. "It's only lunchtime, isn't it?" she reminded her companion.
"So?"
Trisha sighed, unable to find any other argument. "And you won't have any?"
"I'm driving."
"Right." The wine was a balanced mix of moderate sweetness and tartness. Trisha savoured the taste, realising that she couldn't recall the last time she had simply sat and spent time leisurely with a glass of wine. "Thank you," she said. "This is the most wonderful day of last year." Nick smiled. "Wait to thank me," he said. "The meal hasn't arrived yet." "Tell me about yourself," Trisha requested suddenly. "You're quite the mystery to me." The man's eyebrows rose in amusement.
"Now that's a confession. Why am I a mystery?"
"It's just that I know nothing about you," she admitted.
"Neither do I about you," Nick retorted.
"Fair enough, but let's start with you." Nick hummed in agreement.
"Well, let's."
"I'm not from around here, born in a small township far away from here. I attended an ordinary settlement school, grew up in an ordinary family. But I always had big ambitions. That's why I decided to come here. It wasn't easy, but I managed. My student years were fun, then I got a job, then I changed 5 more jobs until I got to Mr. Arnold. And the rest you know." There's a feeling that you skipped a lot in your story, Trisha remarked thoughtfully. Who knows? Maybe I'll tell you about it later. Now we are going to talk about you, he urged. Okay, well, I don't have anything interesting either. I'm from here, but I was raised by my mum. I never knew my father, and my mum didn't tell me much about him. She was a music teacher, so we lived modestly, she confessed. Did you go to music school? Trisha sighed. Oh, yes, 2 long years of my life. I only remember one tune now. My mother made me play it most often. Everything else faded from my memory. I've played it so many times that if you woke me up at 2 a.m., I'd play it with my eyes closed. What's the tune? Bach? Chopin? Tchaikovsky? No, it's not classical, that's for sure. Honestly, I don't even know. My mum never told me who wrote it. I have a theory that she composed it herself, but I can't confirm it, she shared. Do any of your children go to music school? No, Trisha responded curtly. Unlike you, I didn't study very well, Trisha continued. For some reason, I suddenly decided that I wanted to be a nurse. I thought it was a beautiful, noble and romantic profession. It is, said Nick. Not a bit, sighed Trisha. No, I don't regret it. I found studying interesting and working as well, especially at work where I met Hector, my husband. He was your patient? Yes, I had just started working and I didn't know how to do anything myself. I remember even my hands were shaking when I was giving injections or dressings. I thought it was obvious, but Hector didn't notice. Nick smiled. I'm sure he fell in love with you at first sight. He said he did. In fact, I liked him too. We started dating soon after, and 6 months later we were married. Shortly after, I found out I was pregnant. You've become a very young mum, Nick smiled. Yes, the first time was difficult, but then my mum was still alive. She helped me a lot. Trisha sighed. Then Zach grew up, went to kindergarten, and I went back to work. However, when he turned 4, I got pregnant with Brandon, and 3 years later, Alicia was born. After Alicia was born, we decided I'd stay at home, so I didn't work for 7 years. Wow, said Nick. I must say you're doing a great job, especially after such a break. Trisha smiled. Thank you, that's nice to hear. Can I ask you a personal question? Nick asked. Trisha took another sip of wine. Why did I split up with my husband? Yes. He left me, Trisha confessed, possibly influenced by the wine. He just left a note saying he was in love with another woman. He didn't even talk to you? Trisha shook her head. What about the children? He didn't even say goodbye to them either. How awful! And child support? Trisha smiled sadly. It's all right. I'm fine now. That's why you're hanging on to this job. Exactly. They fell silent for a few minutes, contemplating the conversation they just had. Then Trisha asked, What about your love life? You're only 2 years younger than me. I can't believe you haven't had a serious relationship. Nick smiled sadly. I have, and quite a long one. When I was still at college, I dated an ambitious girl. We both had ambition, but our goals were different. My ambition was career-focused, while hers was to find a successful man. Aren't you a successful man? Asked Trisha in surprise. Well, thank you for such a compliment. It's hard for me to assess myself. Then I say you are a successful man, interrupted Trisha. Much obliged, replied Nick with a smile. Well, regardless, my girlfriend at the time did not see me as a successful man. She broke up with me, saying she deserved better. A very foolish woman, Trisha commented. After that remark, I need to get you more wine, said Nick, signalling the waiter. So she left me and I decided to become a successful man so she would come back to me. And how was that going? Great! Along the way I realised that I don't want to be with a woman who doesn't value me for who I am, but for my social status. Trisha nodded. And I don't want to be with a man who left, leaving only a note on the table, she said. Nick smiled sadly. I fully support such a wise decision. In the morning, Trisha awoke with difficulty. Her head was throbbing, her mouth was dry, and the sunlight streaming through the curtains seemed unbearably bright. I've overslept. I probably didn't even set my alarm clock last night. But the clock indicated that it was still early. Trisha showered and brushed her teeth. Ensuring that the children were still asleep, she quietly went to the main house. Sarah was already bustling about in the kitchen. "Oh, Trisha," the woman greeted her cheerfully. "Good morning. You're up early today?" "Yes," Trisha replied hoarsely. "I seem to have had a wild day off yesterday." Sarah smiled understandingly. "You'll be fine. In an hour you'll be as cheerful as a 15-year-old schoolgirl." Soon she placed a large cup of fragrant tea, redolent with berries and herbs, before Trisha. "The best cure for a hangover," Sarah declared confidently. "And eat this." She placed a plate with a large sandwich with meat, lettuce, tomatoes and eggs in front of Trisha. "This is the most delicious thing I've ever eaten in my life," Trisha said blissfully as she ate her breakfast. "You're magic." "Thank you," Sarah replied, embarrassed. By the start of the workday, Trisha had recovered significantly, and Mr. Arnold was unusually amicable today. Perhaps his meeting with his relatives had influenced him, but he barely critiqued Trisha's actions and refrained from derogatory remarks. "You're surprisingly quiet today," Trisha commented during their traditional afternoon walk after lunch. "It's not evening yet," Mr. Arnold responded, but without malice. "Those are your children, right?" He pointed to Brandon and Alicia, who were chasing each other around the fountain. Zach was sitting on a bench reading a book with one eye and keeping an eye on the younger ones with the other. "Yes, mine," answered Trisha, fearing a reprimand. But Mr. Arnold simply nodded. "They're good kids, and they seem friendly." "Thank you," Trisha replied cautiously. "Are you raising them alone?" The boss continued his unexpected interest. "I'm alone now," she replied. "That's why you put up with me," he said, not as a question but as a statement. Trisha didn't respond. "I too wanted to have many children when I was young," Mr. Arnold suddenly disclosed, "but it didn't work out." "You've been married 4 times, haven't you?" Trisha asked in surprise, then regretted her words. She wasn't supposed to know such information, but surprisingly the chief didn't comment on it. Mr. Arnold seemed to gaze into the distance, as if mentally reviewing his entire life. "My first wife didn't want children, and at the time neither did I. We were young and spoiled, both from rich families. We wanted to have fun and enjoy life. Or rather, my wife did. I was more interested in building a business." "So why did you get married?" Trisha asked. "The parents insisted. It was beneficial for the common cause. I wasn't against it, she was a pretty girl, and I thought we'd be fine. But after a few years it became clear that we were entirely different people. I got divorced and went to work." He paused. "Could I have some water, please?" Mr. Arnold suddenly asked. Trisha quickly handed over the bottle. Mr. Arnold took a sip and continued. "I have almost nothing to say about my second and third wives. I married them for status. They were young and beautiful. I thought it would be great, but each time I quickly realized it wasn't what I wanted. All they wanted from me was money." He paused again. Trisha offered more water, but the man shook his head. "There was a time when I could have experienced true love." "Your 4th wife?" "No, that was before her. I didn't marry that girl. I've regretted it many times since, but I don't want to talk about it. It's too personal." "So everything else isn't too personal?" Trisha thought, puzzled as to why he chose to share all this with her. "My 4th wife has become more of a friend," said Mr. Arnold. "I already knew about her diagnosis when I proposed marriage." "Diagnosis?" Trisha asked. "Yes, she had cancer. We had known each other for years. Our parents had been friends since childhood. Over the years we kept in touch intermittently. Then we met, talked, and decided to spend a few years together.
Were you with her until the end? Trisha asked.
Mr. Arnold nodded. She was a wonderful woman and a true friend. After she died, I didn't want anyone else.
I sympathise with you, Trisha said sincerely. After her words, Mr. Arnold seemed to snap back to reality.
We're talking too much, he said. Let's go home. It's time for my evening pills.
Following this peculiar conversation, Trisha again felt pity for her boss. Their communication didn't improve significantly, yet she found his harsh words easier to bear. As summer was ending, Trisha began to consider the approaching school year. How do you like it here? She asked her children.
I like it very much, Alicia answered first. Anya cooks deliciously. Frank takes us everywhere. There's a big garden and we can play all day long.
You'll be going back to school soon, Trisha reminded her. Her daughter made a funny face.
I don't want to go to school, she said.
Trisha sighed and looked at her middle child.
I like living here too, Brandon said, but I understand that we have to return to school in the city.
Brandon sighed. Then Trisha looked at her eldest son.
I think we need to talk, Zack said and led his mum to the yard. Summer is ending. We'll all have to go back to school soon and consider our accommodation situation.
Trisha smiled, saying,
You're as rational and serious as ever.
Their son nodded, confessing,
Daddy called me the other day.
Trisha's eyes widened in surprise. Why didn't he call me?
I guess he's afraid, but the official reason is that he's very busy.
I see, Trisha sighed. What did he want?
As far as I can understand, he wants to meet with you, perhaps to discuss the divorce, or maybe he wants to reconcile.
Trisha laughed, exclaiming,
Reconciliation?
Well, maybe. Trisha hesitated before asking her son, Do you want that to happen?
Zack shook his head, saying, I don't mind if Brandon and Brenda see him, if they'd like to. I'll see him too if necessary, but the rest is for you to decide.
He is your father, she reminded,
but I don't think I love him any more, and I can't forgive what he did. You don't have to forgive him. Regarding our school, why don't you talk to Nick? He might come up with something.
I'll try. You're the smartest, as always. Trisha hugged her son.
Everything will be all right, Mum, he assured.
Tell your father I'm ready to talk to him. Let him call me.
I'll tell him,
promised Zack. A few days later, after Trisha and Mr. Arnold had completed their morning routines, Nick came into the room.
Ready, Mr. Arnold?
Asked the assistant.
Absolutely, let's go. You're coming with us too, replied the boss, addressing Trisha.
Me? She looked surprised.
Sure, Mr. Arnold replied calmly. I have a lot of paperwork to sign and several face-to-face meetings to attend. I may need you at any time. What if I have a seizure? I don't want to suffocate in front of my business partners.
As they drove to the business centre, Nick said, We're not sure how long it will take, so you can wait for us in the restaurant. It's in the same building on the top floor. Just ask them to bill everything to Mr. Arnold.
Okay, Trisha replied. If I need anything, Nick will call, Mr. Arnold added.
At the restaurant, Trisha ordered tea and tiramisu. She suddenly thought that this would be the perfect opportunity to meet her husband. He seemed to be in town, and they had pressing matters to discuss. She called him and he agreed to come over.
What a nice place you picked,
he said as he sat down at the table. Hector had not changed much, except for losing some weight.
You look wonderful, he complimented.
Thank you, Trisha replied. You too. He shrugged shyly.
I'm glad you called.
Trisha sighed. We should have talked a long time ago, at least to decide when to file for divorce.
That's precisely what I wanted to discuss, Hector said, and moving closer, He gently placed his hand on hers. "Perhaps we were hasty," he suggested. "Maybe we don't need a divorce." "We were hasty?" Trisha asked incredulously. "It was you who left me. Left a note and didn't even say goodbye to the children. You didn't answer calls or messages and just disappeared from our lives as if we meant nothing to you after 15 years of marriage." Hector squirmed uncomfortably in his seat. "Forgive me," he said. "I don't know what came over me. It was like some kind of lapse of mind." Trisha sighed and pulled her hand free. "I won't ask you how long you've been unfaithful or why you decided to leave. But why couldn't you talk to me properly? Why did you abandon the children?" Her husband lowered his eyes in shame. "I don't know, Trisha," he confessed. "I think it's a midlife crisis. At some point everything just became too much. The work, the household chores, the 3 kids. You were always with them and I felt sidelined. I was tired of this damn life full of duties." "Is your new love young, fun, carefree, childless?" Trisha asked. "Sort of. I lost my head back then. I didn't have the courage to tell you or the kids." "What's different now?" she inquired. Hector moved closer. "I've realized how much I've missed you and the kids," he confessed. "I want things to go back to how they were." Trisha slowly shook her head. "Nothing has changed," she said. "We'll reunite and you'll run off with another girl in a few weeks." "I won't do that," the man insisted. Trisha sighed. "Hector," she said, "I've had time to think. I can't forgive you, and my love for you has faded. I think we need to agree on a date to file for divorce." His face changed, and Trisha watched the facade of tenderness and remorse disappear. "Then we need to discuss property division," he said. Trisha was taken aback, but agreed. "Your car is yours, mine is mine, and the apartment is for me and the kids." Hector disagreed. "No, let's sell it and split the money equally," he said sternly. "Equally? When I'm raising 3 children alone?" Trisha retorted. The husband was embarrassed but continued to stand his ground. "I had been paying the mortgage for it, and you didn't work. You sat on my neck." "Oh, really? But I was taking care of the house and the 3 kids, and now I'm paying the mortgage. You left me out of the blue and didn't even help the kids. You can't imagine what I've been through these past few months." "Then let's get back together, and we won't have to split the apartment," the man pleaded. Trisha sighed. "No, Hector. I've already said my piece." "That's how you talk." The husband's voice lowered to a snake-like hiss. "Who's going to want you, alone with 3 kids? Do you think any man but me will look at you? You're just a stupid domestic chicken. All you can do is cook soup." Tears flowed from Trisha's eyes. It hurt to hear such words from the father of her children, the man she had loved for many years. "Go on, play hard to get," her husband continued. "You yourself will come to me on your knees." "She won't," a familiar male voice sounded behind Trisha. Before she could see what happened next, Hector suddenly flew across almost the whole restaurant and collapsed on the floor, and Nick rubbed his hand that had just collided with Hector's jaw. "It was tough, but perhaps instructive," Mr. Arnold commented. Trisha looked around and saw her boss. He looked as pleased as a cat for some reason. "And you are here?" she said in amazement. "Did you hear everything?" "I heard enough," he said dryly. Hector got up from the floor, pressing his palm to his bloody face. "We'll talk to you again," he said to Trisha. "Wow," Mr. Arnold said admiringly. "I should get out of the estate more often. It turns out it's fun here." "Shall we go home?" Nick asked Trisha. "Let's go," Trisha replied quietly, wiping away her tears. At home, he was sent to the kitchen to drink tea and calm down. "We have something to discuss with the boss," said Nick. "And you just relax for a while. I'll call you." But Trisha couldn't relax. She kept replaying what had happened in the restaurant. "Probably they will dismiss me. I doubt Mr. Arnold needs a troubled caregiver who gets his assistant into fights in the middle of the business centre. And what about the apartment? Do we still have to split it in half? Where will I and the kids live then? What if I have to find a new job? Even if I don't get fired today, the school issue is still on the table." The woman's head was filled with so many problems. "Trisha, let's go." She lifted her head. The expression on Nick's face didn't reveal what was in store for her, so she rose and obediently followed him into the chief's office. "What a spectacle you've given us today," Mr. Arnold cheerfully commented. "I am sorry," said Trisha. "I didn't anticipate things turning out this way." "That's okay. It was even amusing," said her boss. "Well, we have other matters to address now." Trisha squeezed with fear. "Do you wish to continue working here?" Mr. Arnold inquired. "Aren't you going to lay me off?" Trisha asked, surprised. "Do you want to be fired?" "No," she answered hastily. "Then I won't fire you." "Okay." Trisha was taken aback. "Your children will soon start school, so I'll provide a car and driver to transport them to and from school." Trisha was stunned. "But why?" she asked. "Because I don't want to find a new caregiver," the boss replied calmly. "Thank you," Trisha muttered. "We also need to address your living arrangements," Nick added. "What about them?" Trisha asked, confused. "Living in that house during the winter is one option," Mr. Arnold explained. "It's warm and all, but it's not very convenient to run to and fro in the frost. Let's take a look at your new rooms." "New rooms?" "There's a wing of the house that's practically empty," explained Nick. "That's where we plan to put you." They left the study and moved towards rooms Trisha had never visited before. "Why is this wing empty?" Trisha asked with curiosity. Mr. Arnold sighed. "It's part of my past," he said. "I wanted to forget it and not remember it, but now I realize it's time to leave the past behind." They entered the largest room. "This is the common room," the boss said. "There's access to 4 bedrooms from here. Just enough for you." Trisha walked around in surprise, taking in the rooms. Each room was like a separate work of art. The furniture was beautiful, tastefully selected, and pictures adorned the walls. Everything was thought out, down to the smallest detail. However, it was clear that no one had used it for many years. "I wonder why," thought Trisha. More mysteries. Suddenly, she noticed the outline of a familiar object under a white cloth. "A piano!" Trisha exclaimed in amazement. "May I?" She turned to Mr. Arnold, who shrugged his shoulders. Trisha carefully removed the white cloth that covered the instrument and ran her finger over the keys. The instrument was slightly out of tune, but certainly playable. The woman sat down and began to play the only melody she remembered, one her mother had played for her countless times since she was a child. The first few notes were difficult, but her hands soon recalled the tune, and her fingers danced effortlessly across the keys. She sat with her back to Mr. Arnold, unaware of the changes in the elderly man's expression. At first, his face stretched in astonishment. Then he turned his head, as if to confirm his ears weren't deceiving him. Soon, tears began to roll down his cheeks. Nick looked at his chief and could not hold back a surprised exclamation. "Mr. Arnold, what's wrong with you?" Trisha quickly stopped and turned, amazed, to her charge. Unashamedly, The elderly man was sobbing, wiping his face with his shirt sleeve.
"How do you know that tune?" he asked. "It was written just for me."
Once Trisha and Nick had calmed Mr. Arnold, they returned to his study, where he began his story.
"When I met Megan," he started, "I was still married to my second wife. We stopped living together for that moment, only meeting to discuss property division. I was exhausted of all this. Work, the divorce. One day after a business meeting, I let my driver leave and went to the park. I sat on a bench and realised how pleasant it was. Just sunshine, bird songs, greening trees. And then I saw Megan."
Trisha was stunned, her heart pounding. She could hardly believe what was happening.
"She was so beautiful," Mr. Arnold said dreamily. "I have never seen a woman so beautiful. And when she smiled at me, I knew I was done for."
Trisha noticed Nick looking at her, but he seemed embarrassed when she caught his eye and turned his attention back to the boss. However, Mr. Arnold seemed oblivious to his surroundings, lost in memories from over 35 years ago.
"My feet led me to her," he continued, "and for the first time in my life, I was scared. I was terrified she would refuse to know me. I've known many women, but none have struck such awe in me upon first sight." To my delight, she agreed. He smiled blissfully. "I don't think I've ever been so happy. My wife and I were already separated, so I brought Megan to this house and built this wing just for her. It's the sunniest side of the house, and the piano—"
"Did she play for you?" Trisha interrupted.
"Yes, Megan taught music, and that tune you played, she composed especially for me."
"Why did you two break up?" Trisha asked. A tear rolled down Mr. Arnold's face again.
"I was a fool," he said calmly. "I wanted to marry Megan, and she refused me. She said that she and I were from different worlds, that she didn't want to become just a rich businessman's wife and stay at home. I tried to persuade her, told her she could do whatever she wanted and be herself. But she refused and ended our relationship."
"Then why do you say it was your fault?" Trisha asked.
Mr. Arnold sighed. "Because I didn't insist on my own way. Because I gave in easily. Because I didn't find out then that she was pregnant."
Trisha looked up at him. Mr. Arnold was staring right back at her.
"Yes," he said calmly. "I'm sure you're my daughter."
Trisha blissfully stretched out her legs and lifted her head, enjoying the sun. She liked it here. The sea always had a positive effect on her, especially now they were starting vacationing as a family every year.
"Mum, did you see that? I swam faster than Brandon." Alicia ran up and exclaimed.
"Not faster, don't lie," the middle son shouted. He was clearly tired and out of breath, but didn't want to admit defeat to his younger sister, who had been going to swim lessons for 3 years and showing great results there.
"I just let you win," Brandon stated.
"Sure you did," Alicia retorted. She knew her capabilities and understood her brother was swimming with all his might. Brandon ran off resentfully towards the beach house. "Honey, did you have to tease him?" Trisha gently reprimanded her daughter. "Okay, go take a shower. We'll go to dinner soon." After her daughter had run off, Trisha stretched, reluctantly got up from the sunbed and walked toward the house. She saw Zach lying in the hammock as usual, talking on the phone. Again with his girl chattering, Trisha thought. He's all grown up now. "Dinner in half an hour," she informed him. He nodded in response, indicating that he heard his mother's words. The spacious house was cool. Mr. Arnold and Nick were, as usual, seated in the living room playing chess. "We'll be going home in 3 days. And you haven't even gotten a tan, Trisha sighed. She playfully ruffled her husband's hair and gave her father a kiss on the cheek.
Don't worry, Trisha,
her father reassured her.
We'll make it.
How's the sea? Nick inquired. Warm, Trisha responded. How's the game?
It's a draw, the father sighed. Nick is not only adopting my business acumen, but also my chess-playing skills.
Nick grinned.
I learn from the best, Mr. Arnold, he answered.
By the way, checkmate.
Oh, you?
Mr. Arnold swore. Suddenly, Alicia appeared. Grandpa, what did you say? Feigning severity, Mr. Arnold coughed in embarrassment.
Young lady, that's a phrase you're legally not allowed to say for another 8 years.
Alicia laughed. We have worse swear words at our school. And then she dashed off to the shower.
We need to change schools,
Mr. Arnold stated decisively.
I won't have my only granddaughter learning such language.
Then we may have to change grandfather too, Trisha said, laughing. Because Alicia hears such words most often from you.
A fair point,
her father conceded, sighing.
I'll try to swear less often.
Trisha smiled, looking back towards the sea. Through the transparent, panoramic wall of their cottage, she could see the large red sun approaching the horizon. I feel so good, she commented, as Nick came over and wrapped his arms around her from behind.
I always feel good with you,
her husband replied. Me too, Trisha agreed, and I'm perfectly happy.